Good Tuesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for June the 27th. Today we are reading together in Judges chapter 3. Judges chapter 3 is going to get us into the heart of the Judges story, all of the many judges that we're going to read about. We're going to see three today who are going to show up in the text. We're going to see the first one, Othniel, who we've already seen in Joshua and here in Judges for a little bit of a few verses have been dedicated to him. We're going to see the second judge, Ehud, and then finally we're going to see the one verse. I think it's one verse. Yeah, one verse, verse 31. Shamgar is going to get a little bit of play here today in chapter 3. So let me go and get the text up on the screen for us. We'll read together here concerning the first three judges, and really we're going to be given a good reason as to why these judges are necessary. We're going to see very unfortunate covenant disloyalty on the part of the people. Let's read about that beginning here in Judges chapter 3, verse number 1. Judges 3, verse number 1. These are the nations Yahweh left in order to test all those in Israel who had experienced none of the wars in Canaan. So seemingly none of those who had been a part of the conquest. This was to teach the future generations of Israel how to fight in battle, especially those who had not fought before. These nations included the 5 rulers of the Philistines and all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites who lived in the Lebanese mountains from Mount Baal Hermon as far as the entrance to Hamath. Yahweh left them to test Israel to determine if they could keep Yahweh's commands he had given their ancestors through Moses. But they settled among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. The Israelites took their daughters as wives for themselves, gave their own daughters to their sons, and worshipped their gods. Verse number 7, the Israelites did what was evil in Yahweh's sight. They fought Yahweh their God, they forgot, they fought in the spiritual sense. They forgot Yahweh their God and worshipped the Baals and Asherahs. Yahweh's anger burned against Israel, and he sold them to King Cushan Rishathaim of Aram Naharaim, and the Israelites served him 8 years. The Israelites cried out to Yahweh, so Yahweh raised up Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's youngest brother, as a deliverer to save the Israelites. The spirit of Yahweh came on him, and he judged Israel. Othniel went out to battle, and Yahweh handed over King Cushan Rishathaim of Aram to him, so that Othniel overpowered him. In the land, then the land had peace for 40 years, and Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. The Israelites, again, verse number 12, did what was evil in Yahweh's sight, and gave King Eglon of Moab power over Israel, because they had done what was evil in Yahweh's sight. After Eglon convinced the Amorites and Amalekites to join forces with him, he attacked and defeated Israel and took possession of the city of Palms, which is Jericho. And the Israelites served King Eglon of Moab 18 years. Then the Israelites cried out to Yahweh, and he raised up Ehud, son of Gera, a left-handed Benjaminite, as deliverer for them. The Israelites sent him with a tribute for King Eglon of Moab. Ehud made himself a double-edged sword 18 inches long. He strapped it to his right thigh under his clothes and brought the tribute to the King Eglon of Moab, who was an extremely fat man. When Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he dismissed the people who had carried it. At the carved images near Gilgal, he returned and said to King Eglon, "I have a secret message for you." The king said, "Silence," and all his attendants left him. Then Ehud approached him while he was sitting alone in his upstairs room where it was cool. Ehud said, "I have a message from God for you," and the king stood up from his throne. Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into Eglon's belly. Even the handle went in after the blade, and Eglon's fat closed in over it, so that Ehud did not withdraw the sword from his belly, and the waist came out. Ehud escaped by way of the porch, closing and locking the doors of the upstairs room behind him. Ehud was gone when Eglon's servants came in. They looked and found the doors of the upstairs room locked, and thought he was relieving himself in the cool room. The servants waited until they became embarrassed and saw that he had still not opened the doors of the upstairs room. So they took the key and opened the doors, and there was their lord laying dead on the floor. Ehud escaped while the servants waited. He passed the Jordan near the carved images and reached Sirah. After he arrived, he sounded the ram's horn throughout the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came down with him from the hill country, and he became their leader. He told them, "Follow me, because Yahweh has handed over your enemies, the Moabites, to you." So they followed him, captured the fords of the Jordan leading to Moab, and did not allow anyone to cross over. At that time, they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all stout and able-bodied men. Not one of them escaped. Moab became subject to Israel that day, and the land had peace for 80 years. And then finally, verse 31, after Ehud, Shamgar, son of Anath, became judge. He also delivered Israel, striking down 600 Philistines with a cattle prod. And that is Judges chapter 3. Well, the reason they're in this situation and in need of judges or deliverers, as Othniel is described in verse number 9, and really is, again, a good way to understand who the judges are. Whenever we think of judges, we probably think of our American context of judges, men who sit on fancy chairs wearing black robes and swinging a gavel, but that certainly is not what these men were at all. They were deliverers, they were warriors, they were often pictured well as warlords. And we see the necessity for those is the fact that the people failed the test. Remember, this seems to be a generation that had not been engaged in the conquest, so Yahweh is testing them to figure out whether or not they're going to be faithful to him. How does he do that? Well, there are nations around them, the Canaanites, Philistines, Sidonians, Hivites. These are nations in the north, south, east, and west. They are nations that surround Israel, and they are going to be the test to see whether or not they will be faithful to Yahweh, to figure out whether or not they would keep his commands that he had given them through Moses. Unfortunately, we see very clearly that they did not do that. How so? Well, they did not do that because instead of hariming and driving out and dispossessing and killing, exterminating these nations from the land, we see them actually settling down with these nations, not even just with them, but among them, so much so that they intermarried with these nations, which was a direct violation of a very clear command that Yahweh had given to Israel all throughout the giving of the law, that they were not to be influenced by these nations, most certainly not intermarry with them. You are not to give your daughters to them. And you are not to take their daughters for your sons, but that's exactly what they did. And for that, there was a great punishment that would come. They did what was evil in Yahweh's sight. They forgot Yahweh, their God. They worshiped the Baals. They worshiped the Asherahs, and Yahweh's anger rightfully burned against them, and he sold them into basically servitude for this King Cushan Rishathaim from Aram Naharaim. And Israel served him for 8 years. So they're being punished for their sin for 8 years. Now, I need to pause here for a second and recognize that whenever we read about the Israelites, we're not talking about, if I understand Judges correctly, the story that's being painted for us here, it's not the nation as a whole. For the most part, the stories that we have here are really regionally specific. So, for instance, we have here, seemingly from Othniel's story of the first judge, this is something that happens more in the southern portion of Israel, in the southern area. Once we get to Ehud, if I'm reading this correctly, this is something that's happening in the eastern part of Israel. So these judges, these leaders, these warlords and warriors and deliverers, it's not a completely nationalistic story. They have the regions in which they are working and being raised up by God to save. So for Othniel, whenever the people cry out to Yahweh, which that sounds very much like Exodus again, he hears them, and he raised up Othniel, the son of Kenaz. This is Caleb's youngest brother, as a deliverer to save the Israelites. Want to know what's most interesting about Othniel? He's not a natural Jew. He's not a natural Jew. He's an Edomite, in fact, because Caleb himself was not a naturalized Jew. He was brought into and naturalized into Israel. So that's just very interesting that there doesn't seem to be anyone else in Israel, specifically in Judah. There's no one else in Judah to deliver the people except this person that was not born into Judah, but that was naturalized into Judah. How interesting that is, that he is given as a deliverer he judged Israel, that he went into battle and he overpowered Cushan Rishathaim of Aram, and then they had peace for 40 years. Now, what's interesting here is what precipitated Yahweh sending Othniel. It was the fact that they cried out to Yahweh. Was that their repentance? Was that the repentance of the people in this moment? Because I think that seems to be the normative cycle, the process that would go on here, that the people would rebel against Yahweh. He would punish them. They would cry out to him for deliverance. He would send a deliverer. The deliverer would have success. They would have peace for a time. Then after that deliverer passes on, well, after that, the people would return to their wicked ways. So that seems to be their cry out in repentance, is the crying out to Yahweh. Well, after Othniel dies, we see verse number 12. Verse number 12, again, things not as they should be, where the Israelites did what was evil in Yahweh's sight. And in this moment, King Eglon of Moab, and then also the Ammonites and the Amalekites end up coming into this picture as well. But here's the thing. They should have already been done. They should already been done away with. They should not even be in this picture, because they should not be a people anymore. They should have either been killed or they should have been dispossessed and run completely out of the land. But because they didn't do that, because of the failures that we read about in chapter 1, here they are, exactly as the writer of Judges talks about. Here they are as, let me find it real fast if I can find it quickly here. Here they are as, here they are as thorns. There we go. Verse number 3 of chapter 2. There will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a trap for you. Here are these nations that should have been run off, that should not be a part of the picture, being a part of the picture because Israel did not do as it was supposed to do. So here they are. They attack Israel. They take possession of the city of palms, which is Jericho. We see that. Remember the story from back in Deuteronomy 34, Judges 1. We see that being the case here, that this place is rebuilt. Was not supposed to be rebuilt, but they rebuilt it anyways. And we have the Israelites serving King Eglon for 18 years. Verse 15. Israelites cried out to the Lord. They cried out to Yahweh. Is this their repentance? Possibly so. Possibly so. So he raises up who? Well, Ehud. Who's he? The son of Gera. He's a Benjaminite. He is a left-handed Benjaminite. Now, there is some interesting thought about this. Why would it need to be said that he was left-handed? Well, really what that means is that he's not left-handed. He's actually right-handed, but he has trained himself in order to be able to fight with his left hand, because that was a very unorthodox way of fighting. So he would have had a very distinct advantage in warfare. Again, these judges are warriors. They are warlords. So many of them, if not all of them, there's a lot of killing that goes on. Because whenever you disobey God, you get yourself into trouble. Well, it really just compounds into greater trouble. So what do they do with Ehud? Well, what they do is they send him with a tribute to their captor at this time, to their master, King Eglon. They send him with a tribute. What are they doing here? Well, they're sending Eglon to be an assassin. They are sending him to be an assassin. So he meets with Eglon. He in the process, he makes for himself a double-edged sword, 18 inches long, which is basically a dagger about this long. He makes a dagger about that long, and he straps it not on the right or on the left side of his body, which would be natural, because think if you're right-handed, you reach over and pull out like this. Well, what does he do? He puts it on this left side, because they're not going to check there. Everybody's right-handed this time for the most part. So they're going to check his left side, not going to find anything. He's going to be good to go, all the while he's concealing his weapon on the right side so he can grab with his left hand and bring it up. So he meets with this man, with Eglon. The text says he's an extremely fat man. I've read a number of resources that dispute that translation of this term. Some would say, Kenneth Way, for instance, he says that instead of being a fat man, he's more so a built man. He's a stout man. This word Eglon has some connotations with like calves and bulls. So instead of just being just obese and fat and portly like we would think, He's more of a well-built man. He's a sturdy man. He's a strong man. He's a king, and we should expect for that to be the case. So whenever he meets Eglon, he gives the tribute, and then he basically says, I want to meet with you in person. Eglon and he'll meet in person. The text says that he approaches him, pulls out his knife. I have a message from God for you. And he does, grabs his short sword and stabs up and plunged it into Eglon's belly. Wade says that the way this probably would have happened is he would have stabbed upwards under the rib cage, up through and into the heart. So as you're doing that, the hilt, the handle of the sword is going to go upwards, and he's going to be able to have great penetration, so much so that everything between his belly and his heart will begins to seep out here in this moment. It's very graphic, but hey, this is Judges for you. If you don't like blood and guts, I'll be honest, Judges is probably not the text for you, because it is a very gory, a very, very gruesome and descriptive text of, again, all the violence that takes place that is predicated on Israel's unwillingness to follow Yahweh in the covenants. So he kills him, then he escapes out the window. He's basically a Jewish ninja. I think I heard one of my friends describe Ehud in that way. He's a Jewish ninja. He's a Jewish assassin ninja. He kills them with deception and quickness, and then jumps out the window and runs away while they're waiting, while his servants are waiting for him. They wait, and they're thinking, okay, well, he's using the bathroom, he's relieving himself, so we'll wait. But they keep waiting longer, and they realize, hey, he's not, what's going on? So they go and they check, and he's dead. What does Ehud do after this? Well, he goes and very interesting, the detail that he passed the Jordan near the carved images, the idols. Who do these idols belong to? I wonder. After he arrived, he sounded the ram's horn throughout the hill country of Ephraim, and he became their leader, the text says. He says, follow me, for Yahweh has handed over your enemies, the Moabites, to you. So they followed him and captured the fords of the Jordan leading to Moab, and did not allow anyone to cross over. They struck down 10,000 Moabites, all stout and able-bodied men. That sounds like their king. That sounds like King Eglon. They destroy them, and Moab, the tables turned. So now no longer is Israel serving Moab, but Moab is serving Israel, and they had peace for 80 years. 80 years is a good long while. But again, while this region might have had peace, other places might have not within Israel. So again, be thinking in terms of regional stories, not Israel as a whole. And then finally, the text ends with Shamgar. Little to nothing is said about Shamgar, and it's very interesting that there's a real distinct structure of the book of the Judges. A couple of things that you've seen already. One of them being this downward spiral of the Judges, where things just go from worse to worse. But also we have this diagram right here from Kenneth Way's material on Judges, where it shows the symmetry between the stories in the Judges. That you have a prologue. The story goes in this direction. It goes counterclockwise. That you have the prologue leading to Othniel. Othniel, there's some similarities between him and Samson, one of those being the fact they're both in the southern region, I believe. Then it goes from Ehud to Shamgar. There's some correlation there between Jephthah and Ibzan, Elon and Abdon. And then you also see here that Gideon has basically two parts of his story. He has a prologue and he has an epilogue. And then you see the rest of these as well. Kenneth Way's book's a really good one. There's just no way I can share all the different things that are in this particular material, but it is very, very good. I think I posted it on yesterday's reading in case anybody would like to go and pick up a copy of that for yourself. Just goes into great detail. It gives a lot more detail than we can discuss in a short reading and summary such as this. But with Shamgar, he is the son of Anath. What's interesting about that? What's interesting about that is the name of the Canaanite war deity. Seems that Shamgar is not a non-Israelite as well. Why is Israel needing non-Israelites to come deliver them, to come defeat the enemy? Because it doesn't seem like there's many there who have the faith that they need to have. Shamgar wielding a cattle prod, which would have been a stick, which on one end would have been sharp like a goad. On the other end probably would have had a rounded ball section in order to move around. So here he comes with this cattle prod, and he strikes down 600 Philistines. Oh man, I wish we had more detail about Shamgar, but just a very interesting little single verse we have here of this mysterious man who seems to be a non-Israelite, who himself becomes a judge, is a warlord within Israel's history, and strikes down 600 of the Philistines. Very, very interesting. If you have any questions or comments about this text, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. And I do appreciate you tuning in today. We'll keep reading tomorrow. We'll read actually, I think, a double chapter tomorrow. Yeah, we'll read chapter 4 and 5, which details the narrative of Deborah and Barak. And also we have Deborah's song that we're going to read tomorrow, since they both go together. What chapter 5 and Deborah's song really does is it provides us background and some of the underlying emotions from what was taking place in chapter 4. So we will read both of those together and consider them as a single unit tomorrow. Again, if you have any questions, leave those below, and I hope that you'll tune in tomorrow as we do read from Judges chapter 4 and Judges chapter 5. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Take care, and God bless.